Good afternoon to everyone, and greetings also to our viewers online. For those who followed the previous panel, we heard a lot about human rights and the importance of linking human rights and peacemaking. One of the speakers said human rights belong to people. So if we take human rights seriously, we need to talk about and engage with human rights activists and defenders and movements and their roles in peace and dialogue efforts. But we also need to recognize that not all protest movements are necessarily aligned with the goals and values of universal human rights, but they represent important voices in society. This is one of many examples of challenges that we want to tackle in this panel. My name is Véronique Dudoué. I'm a senior advisor at the Bogov Foundation. I help colleagues to develop tools and to apply best practices on how to increase inclusivity and participation in peace processes, in peacemaking, and in conflict transformation. My belief is that if we take inclusive change seriously, we need to pay attention to social movements, popular uprisings, mass grassroots movements, and find innovative ways to engage with them in order to prevent violent escalation, but also in order to advance sustainable peace. So it's therefore my great pleasure to be moderating this panel today on protest and peace. The starting point for this panel is the realization that protest movements have been hugely significant in driving political change in many countries around the world. However, external actors involved in peacemaking, such as mediators, diplomats, security actors, are not always sure on the best ways to engage with protest movements as part of their peace efforts. In my own research on nonviolent movements and peace processes, I have heard many complaints about, for example, the lack of leadership. I've been hearing many mediators say, well, they don't speak with one voice. We don't know how to find their spokespersons. Also complaints about the radical claims or the lack of concrete policy proposals that movements make. But also critiques around their closeness with, or sometimes their instrumentalization by certain conflict actors. At the same time, we all know that peaceful protest movements are increasingly present in fragile and conflict-affected countries. They do have relevant contributions to make to peace processes, to nonviolent political transitions of power. They can pressure the parties to sit at the table. They can push for transformative agendas. They can break deadlocks. Or if excluded, they can actually create deadlocks and block progress towards peace and democracy. So given the potential contributions of protest movements for peacemaking, and the recurrent trade-offs and dilemmas that we face in engaging with them, we will have a discussion around key questions such as how can external actors engage with peaceful protest movements without undermining the legitimacy of those actors, but also without losing their own impartiality. Also, how can external actors interact with movements that do not necessarily share their own goals and their own worldviews, or even with protests against international intervention? The focus of this conference is not to resolve specific conflicts, but it's to advance and to innovate the peace-building field as a whole. However, in this panel, we want to draw insights from two complex conflict contexts that are going through very challenging times, Sudan and Mali. Those two contexts highlight in their own ways both the opportunities and the challenges of including or engaging with protest movements for peace purposes, but also the dilemmas for international actors to include those actors in their efforts, especially against the background of growing multipolarity. So to stir the discussions, we have 5 distinguished panelists with us. So to my immediate left, we have Shireen El Sharif, who is a Sudanese human rights defender. He was very involved in the 2018-19 revolution in Sudan as coordinator of the Khartoum Resistance Committee as part of the youth pro-democracy movement. He was also imprisoned after the military coup in 2021, and he currently leads the NGO Youth in Action Sudan. Then, next to him, I have the great honor to share this panel with His Excellency Abdallah Hamdok, who served as Prime Minister of the Republic of Sudan from 2019 to early 2022. As a policy analyst, as an economist, he has 35 years of experience addressing development challenges across Africa, working for various regional and international organizations. And as I understand, he's currently leading the coordination of Sudanese civilian democratic forces, negotiating for a return to peace and civilian power in Sudan. Next to him, we have with us Dr. Annette Weber, who is the EU Special Representative for the Horn of Africa since 2021. She's a leading expert on the Horn of Africa. She has published extensively on peace and security in the region and advised the German government and many others, and has also a lot of experience in mediation in both Sudan and Ethiopia. Our fourth contributor is going to be Mrs. Fatima Al-Ansar, traveling all the way from Mali, originally from Timbuktu in North Mali. She's the founder of Tilwalte Peace Network that advances peace building and security in Africa. She's an engaged public leader, a former diplomat from the Malian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She participated in negotiations and the drafting of the 2020 Transitional Charter. And I think she's also a feminist activist who's advocating for girls' education and women's rights. And finally, we have with us Lieutenant General retired Cornelis Matthiessen, who recently served as Force Commander of the MINUSMA, the UN mission in Mali, from 2022 to 23. He was also deployed in many other conflict regions around the world. He has worked for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for NATO, and has received prestigious decorations for his outstanding service to the Dutch armed forces, but also, if I understand, cooperation with France and Germany. So this is a very diverse panel combining complementary voices from civil society activists, politicians, diplomats, security actors. Given that this is a panel that focuses on protest movements, I want to give the first words to activists, and therefore I will start with Shaheen. So, Shaheen, you have been a member of the resistance committees during the protests in 2019. Could you say a few words about the role of those committees as part of the pro-democracy movement in the revolution? Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you for starting such a panel with the voices of the youth. The youth are the driving factor in a lot of these places, especially in Africa, even in Europe. And we're now just starting to find some places. These are places that we're reclaiming in decision-making. In 2019, I was part of the resistance committees where these groups who found leadership in the FFC, the Force for Freedom and Change. They were very active in getting constituents into getting communities to rally in the fight for democracy and in fighting the regime that was, giving them help for 30 years. These groups found leadership as leadership was not a role. Leadership is never a person. Leadership is a project. It's a commitment. And that was what we saw in the Declaration of Freedom and Change, the FFC declaration. And this gave the youth the trust that they will be involved. There were promises of involvement. There were promises of changing the situation. And when the negotiations started during the sit-in, the presence of this huge group of people on the ground in different states, they were involved. The FFC, the leadership would have discussions with them. They involved them. They would visit them in their areas outside Khartoum, the capital. This was a very amazing engagement where people found leadership in a project. It didn't have a face at the time. And moving on, when after the sit-in was, I'm sorry, I will call it after the massacre of the sit-in, Again, there was a disconnection due to the lack of communication, but the youth trusted this leadership. They organized into the 30th of June protest, which was the largest protest that Sudan has witnessed. And this gave the negotiations, the civilians in the negotiations, outstanding power that was never seen before. But unfortunately, when the time for negotiations came, we did not hear a word about it until results were out. We were watching on TV. Still, we were holding to the fact that this leadership will continue to commit, will continue what it has planned as a project. Unfortunately, that is where the schism happened, and the lack of presence of this group, the constituents, the fact that they are not observing, the fact that they are not seeing, weakened the power of these negotiators. Instead of getting the best that we can get, we got the minimum of what we can get. And unfortunately, that is the issue that persisted. And following that, this distrust of leadership was actually transferred to the Prime Minister, Dr. Abdullah Hamdok. And we continue to believe in that leadership, even when we felt that the FFC was falling short, the previous leadership. We still trusted the leadership that we had. And yet again, from then on, it continued that there was a lack of involvement, a lack of participation. Of course, one of the main concerns was accountability through a parliament, through a transitional parliament, where the youth were certain this is where they can make change. Of course, that never happened. All alternatives to all promises were gone, all commitments were not fulfilled. And unfortunately, this has led to a great schism that still persists to this day. Politicians make mistakes. That's normal, they're humans, they're trying their best. But when you're doing the mistake alone and you're not involving the youth, you will take the full blame. If we're there in the room, we made the mistake. But now every move being taken, it is the politician's fault. We're not part of it, and we cannot be empathetic to a solution we're not a part of. I will link this back to the current context. While unfortunately, 3 years after that, Sudan has entered a bloody conflict that is ripping the state apart, but we're witnessing a similar political atmosphere. We're again witnessing the same mistakes. There is no learning, there is no involvement. These peace-building solutions they're following the old formula of introducing, on paper, a viable solution to the people and expecting support. Well, in reality, we are part of that solution. We have to be. We will make right on our commitments the same way we expect you to make right on your commitments. And this is the biggest challenge that we had faced.
Thanks a lot. If you could briefly add, so you've mentioned the challenge of inclusion and youth inclusion in negotiations then and now. If you could briefly maybe perhaps add a couple of thoughts around the role of external actors, since we're discussing this in this panel. What kind of engagement, what kind of support did you receive from the EU and other actors, and what outcomes did that have?
Well, I'll be frank. International actors showed a lot of support to the model of the youth movement, how a whole generation was calling for democracy. This was outstanding. The peaceful movement was amazing. We had a lot of visits, we had a lot of coverage, and one of the success of the revolution in the media worldwide was due to these youth icons. And however, the international community was engaging them as a decoration piece, as something that can fill up the gaps in the different agreements, in the different processes happening. They were forcing a role of political actors on these groups when they were positioning themselves to be lobby groups. They wanted to have a leadership. They wanted to slowly integrate with the leader, be part of the process. But unfortunately, they kept being pushed a role until these groups that we were part of believed in that role that was not suitable for them. They turned into a charter, of course, that turned them into somewhat of a political group. And again, this was a deformation of the natural progress of youth movement. This has made it very difficult for them to find the right place to work, and the international community keeps pushing this role that it's not part of their progress. And again, this specific role fits well with the agenda of different politicians. This means no challenging on the stage. There is no use. There is no new generation to challenge the older generation. There is no type of change, push for change that is happening when such a thing is being done. And this is the biggest mistake the international community has done, and we're still suffering from it as a youth movement.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn to the political perspective. So, Your Excellency, Dr. Hamdok, you've heard about the youth view on the role and the involvement of the pro-democracy protest activists during the negotiations in 2019 leading to the transition. What are your thoughts on how that involvement has been, the challenges that has been mentioned, and what was missing in order to make those contributions meaningful and effective?
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted and happy to be here today in this very prestigious and distinguished audience. And thanks for Berho Foundation for inviting us. As we agreed, let me start. I cannot afford but not to start with the current situation in the country. Today, Sudan passes through the most catastrophic and serious disaster in its modern history. You know the statistics. Displacement, refugees, but more than that, more than half of the population, about 25 million people, are subjected to extreme form of hunger, starvation, and all that. People might die with bullets, with hunger than bullets. Thanks again to France, Germany, and the EU for organizing this conference 2 days ago in Paris. It was a step in the right direction. As Sudanese, we thought for a while we were neglected. The world has left us. We know that there are other crises in the world, Gaza, Ukraine before that, and all that. But I think the meeting and the conference in Paris was a step in the right direction. We came to Paris. The Sudan appeal was funded by 5%. We left Paris, I think, with very generous contributions, close to what was needed, and we hope that could be delivered. But again, also the issue of the UN resolution in this current geopolitics was a step in the right direction. What is required is for that resolution to be implemented, engaging and bringing in some mechanisms. Access is key, cross-border, cross lines and all that. But let me come back to the issue of today. I'm very delighted that you started with the activists, with the young people. You know, our young people and young talent is, as they say, is half of the present, but 100% of the future. I can say with conviction, I agree with every word Shaheen has said. The young people, men and women, were in the front line in the fight against the dictatorship, and they helped topple the dictatorship. And naturally, like what happened in all the other protest movements, you could see this in the Arab Spring, in many other places, Latin America and others. Once the dictatorship was overthrown, they took a backseat. And it was left to the political space and all that. And I think the issue also of having a flat structure and all this, it has its problems and challenges, and it's not unique to Sudan. But I can also say the Sudanese peaceful protest movement has all the attributes of a successful movement in terms of they kept their unity, and that is what brought us to the toppling of the dictatorship. They were resilient. Anytime we thought they were crushed, they rise again. It happened in 2010, 2013, and from the beginning of the coup in 1989. But also, they were able to articulate a one cause. The slogan of freedom, peace, and justice was the one that captured the imagination of the entire country and unified and went along to topple the dictator. They were resilient because this is not the first time in our history that we toppled a dictatorship. Started I can go back even the struggle against the colonial rule was essentially struggle for democracy and all that. We toppled the dictatorship in 1964, 1985, and this December revolution, 2018, which culminated in 2019. But I think we need to learn a lot of lessons from that experiment, that we need to stay the course. We need to have what I can call this unity of purpose that address all the segments, the youth included. And I've been, when I was in the office, I've been engaging them and discussing with them all the time. It is very fine and nice to be the guardian of the revolution, take the moral high ground. But that's not enough. You need to be part of the political space. And because decisions are not taken in the streets are good in the protest, in putting pressure, enforcing this. But you need to move beyond that, organize and all this, and don't shy away from politics. You want to do it on your own. You need to organize. You need to join political parties. But you cannot convince me that you shun the political parties. The liberal democracy is organized through political parties. You cannot convince me that you want to wish away the political parties. This is something not healthy. Political parties are useful in articulating the society objectives and all that. They might be discredited all over the world, but we do not know any other means that would articulate society goals and objectives outside that. We need to engage them, improve them, make them work, and all that. But if we continue this flat movement and structures, we will be able to effect change on that moment. But as we disperse and everybody go and stand behind a small or big flag, unity will be lost and all that. But I think I'm aware of the time, but through the discussion, and I hope this will be a very interactive channel and maybe also with the audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm happy to hear there's some agreement on the importance of the youth, but also what you call the challenge of moving from flat hierarchies to engagement in politics. And I want now to hear from the external perspective on that. So Dr. Weber, you've been involved in the current period in Sudan, trying to engage with protest movements that are still from the revolution time and that are still very active. Do you recognize yourself in some of the challenges you've had so far, and what are the main constants that you've been facing in attempting to do that engagement?
Thank you, and thank you really for laying the stage here. We are in East Berlin, and I think we have learned that you can change systems and political structures by protest movements. But can you sustain the politics? And I think this is really the question we're having in Sudan right now. And I think you need protest movements right now, but power is there and it's not given. You have to really keep engaging. And I think this is the question of representation. It's the question of who is sitting in the meetings. And I thank you for also referring to the Paris conference, because after the break of after the outbreak of the war, we started a couple of weeks after to do the first consultation to get Sudanese to talk amongst themselves in an inclusive in an increasingly inclusive way, because our position as EU has been, in the EU, in our member state countries, we have coalition governments. We have people where you have to sit with a political adversary. You do not agree on the politics, but you agree that there is a strategic objective. And I think the strategic objective for the Sudanese civilians has been very clear in the beginning: stop the war and get to a civilian transition. I think this has been our position as EU, as member states, France and Germany in Paris, but also throughout this year now. But how does that work? And I think this is, then it's coming to the questions of who is then in the room, not just on the civilian side, but who is in the room on the belligerents. And I think what we really very strongly see, that if we don't switch from the focus on the two general generals to the focus on the civilians, because it's not just the youth that will be the future of Sudan, it will also be the civilians that will be the political future of Sudan, hopefully. And I think that's where we have an agreement in terms of a strategic objective. So we have to focus more on the civilians, we have to focus more on the inclusivity, but it's not a prescriptive idea of, you know, coming from the EU and saying, look, we've been through this in the 80s, 90s. It's really giving that space. But how do you bring that space given to decision-making positions? And I think this is really it's the million-dollar question, especially in a war where the two sides, the two belligerent sides, do not only have the power that they claim for themselves, but of course have, you know, basically regional, international support systems who want one of the two sides to win. So again, I think this is really, we have new dimensions on leaderless movements, on protest movements who do not want to have a leader. We have a new dimension on multipolarity, and we have a new dimension on mediation that is not the mediation we know from, let's say, 10 years ago, when, you know, or longer, when we had the CPA. It's a mediation that is also much more fragmented. It's much more working in sequence. We're not looking at the mediator, the lead mediator. We will not find that at the current moment. There's too much interest. There's too much, engagement. But I think we have to also switch that from looking at this as a challenge to looking at this as a reality, where the question is more about how do you coordinate better on the different mediation tracks? How do you bring all these voices in? Not just bringing them in, you know, point by point, but how do you make the civilian voices the strongest voice, where basically the generals understand you cannot fight against them. You cannot fight against your own citizens, not forever. And I think this is really the challenges we see right now. But I think it's not something that is not possible, but the efforts are different. The efforts are different because the coordination is it's a multiple coordination on not just different hierarchies, but also across the international community. We haven't done a good job in the last year. We had like at least 4 or 5 different initiatives. How do you bring that in the strategic objective, not how do you bring that into one? But then, of course, it corresponds with the question, how do you bring leaderless movement? How do you bring protest movements who do not want to turn into political parties to the political fore? But this, again, there I very much agree with you. This cannot be done from outside. I mean, you know, as a veteran of a feminist struggle in this country, no one is giving you the power. No one is giving you the space. You need to fill that space, claim that space. But I think then it also needs to become a transformative space. But the same goes, how do we bring this into the mediation of the two general sides? And I think this is where we have a huge, this is a huge gap. We have it, I think, successfully done. You have it done successfully on the civilian side, and I really hope we can build up on this. But on the belligerent side, this is really about core power. And so how do you transform this? And how can you send that message, that strong message of as civilians, as youth, as women, who managed to bring, to topple the old regime? How do you bring this into the discussion right now? And I think this is really where we can support, we can host, we can organize. But I think we're also facing that challenge of a new mediation landscape, of a new mediation reality that is not focused on one mediator. It's really much more fragmented and much more, sequenced and core. The core aspect being multipolarity rather than unified access. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To all three of you, we've heard about a lot of challenges. What I heard this morning from Andrew in his opening remarks was that he wants us to think about concrete solutions. So I would like to give you one more chance to share maybe a couple of very concrete recommendations that you can think of or that you would like to address to the audience here, the peace building community, the envoys, the mediators, on how external actors can help to address those challenges. Whoever would like to start.
Okay, let me just come back from what I just said. I think what the real core recommendations from my side is really on the two basically, to us as the international community, we have to overcome the competition. We need to get serious on the coordination. And I think we have started in Paris with the ministers of the region, of some of the Gulf states and the multilaterals, but this has to become a much more serious engagement. So take the strategic objectives that we all share, ceasefire and humanitarian access, as the first steps. We might not agree on the third objective of civilian transition, but let's work on the first two as international community, even if it's different initiatives. But we need to coordinate better. And on the civilian side, I think this is where the future is. You know, the civilian track will be the political track. The future has to be, hopefully, a civilian transition. So let's become, you know, more of a process with a much more inclusive approach. Again, rather than the competition of who is the gatekeeper of what. And I think that's just speaking as a European. You know, from the background of coalition building, where this is a daily engagement. This is not a one. You know, it's not. You don't just change that. This is a daily negotiation. I think that's something difficult, but that's the clear recommendation to the civilian side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think if I could think about 3 issues, but first, let me just mention the fact that in probably the Western world, we need to reconcile the short-term election interest here vis-a-vis the long-term complex development issues and peace processes which do require to stay the long haul. That need to be reconciled. But I think on the most concrete recommendations, we need to probably provide an opportunity for sharing of experiences and context from elsewhere. You are exposed, whether it's UN or bilateral or multilateral, to experiences elsewhere in the world which might have succeeded. So sharing that experience will be very useful. Second, the idea of helping this fragmented political landscape to unite. And I think the civilian platform that was created in Paris was a step in the right direction. Let us build on that and build on the fact that people with very different conflicting views could share one platform and maybe move forward towards coming up with a common denominator, however low, but that's a step in the right direction. But also continue the solidarity campaign, whether in the country, in the region, and the world at large, and provide direct support to these movements so that they could have their feet on the ground and could be equipped and help to be able to fight these fierce battles against the dark forces and the dictatorship. If we could do this, we would go a long way in helping this process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before going into what I would like to speak about the approach of international community, well, I'd like to say, going back to some comments made by my fellow panelists regarding the fragmentation of the youth-led movement and how it doesn't have central leadership. Quite honestly, I do feel like this is a statement with ill intent when putting that description on these groups, when it applies to all institutes in Sudan. It applies to the army, it applies to political parties, it applies to the civil service. So focusing that on these groups to put that as a challenge in engaging them, that is very ill intent. We are engaging with some political parties that are fragmented into 10. So how is it difficult to engage at one state that has 3 coordinates or 3 central resistance committees? So again, this goes back to my point that the international community and local actors are trying to put these groups into the old setting of personal politics. Politics have to be performed by people, not by groups, not by processes. us as youth movement, we're looking for commitments. The fact that we're not looking to essentially have a young leader from us. We are constituents. We talk with other people, with other generations. We don't mind if one of them is leading, as long as he's keeping his commitments. This is what keeps happening. We keep losing trust. We don't want to speak with people who keep not fulfilling their commitments. And again, the international community looks at this from the negative side instead of changing his approach into putting processes that can build this trust the same way it happened. We have an experience between April 2019 up to, let's say, COVID, when it started. This was a period of extreme trust in the government, extreme trust in the political leadership, because there were some commitments being followed. We were seeing some roads, even though we were excluded from the negotiations, we trusted the processes that were handed to us. The minute these processes stopped, the minute what we agreed on, that there will not be politicians, even if I personally don't agree, but you committed. I didn't ask you to commit, but that's what you said. There were a lot of wrong things that happened that made us lose trust. And instead of building bridges, again, we're being branded as being, oh, you need to unite, then come to us. Well, isn't that what the military is telling the civic society? And we're saying that that is a loaded request. Why is it being asked of us? Again,
sorry, if you can give maybe one positive recommendation, what to do about that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Well, it's a very big discussion, but again, like I said, the change of the approach. Again, we approach these groups as groups seeking a process that they can trust. They're not seeking power. They're not seeking authority. They want to allow these political leaders because they have experience to get there. So we need not to push them to be the leaders. They're going to evolve. They're going to take the stage in the coming years. But they want processes and they want commitments that can be tangible. That is all.
Great, thank you so much. So we've heard about a lot of challenges that I'm sure the next panelists will agree to. We even heard about civilian transition, which I think resonates a lot with the current situation or what might be needed in Mali. So I'm going to first go to you, Fatima, and ask you to maybe give us a few insights on the role of protest movements as conflict actors in Mali, especially in the recent history since the conflict that started in 2012, and how have governments on the other hand and external actors on the other hand engaged with those protests?
Hello, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Not my first time in Germany, but my first time in Berlin. And I really like it, even though the weather is cold. Back home it's really hot. So it's a good change. I'm happy to see as well Al-Gassimwan, my brother from Mali, I would say, who was the recent head of MINUSMA mission in Mali. So feel free, if I'm saying anything that is wrong, to intervene, since you have been in Mali and have also experienced some of the things that's going on right now. So for me, I would say that most of the unconstitutional change that have been happening in Mali, I would say since 2012 to today, I would say it has been done by youth. I would say the coup d'etat have been done by youth. Why am I saying that? If you look at the 2012 coup d'etat that happened, it was youth that went on the street, starting from small movement protests from the region, like the northern, the central side, and then come to Bamako, which is the capital city. And the coup d'etat happened 3 months before the elections. And it was young people who went on the streets and women who were asking the former president more transparency in the resolution of the conflict, and especially the northern conflict. They said that the president was taking a side in the conflict. And then the coup d'etat happened, and it's that same young people who went on the street requesting for the organization of the election, and also requesting for the arrival of Barkhane, which was the French troop, because the terrorist group were taking over the whole country almost, because they were in the northern region of Mali for over a year. So they asked for the French troop to come and help fight against the terrorists. So the French came, has Serval, and after it's become Barkhane, and then MINUSMA came a year after in 2013. And from then we have signed a peace agreement with the armed groups in 2015. So the negotiation keep going on. The conflict was calm a bit until 2019, when the herders and the farmers conflict have taken another level. When the Ogosago violence happened, when over 150 civilians were killed in one attack, and in a month over 200 civilians were killed. So that's when, again, youth went on the street again, requesting, saying that the government is poorly handling the security situation, the government is corrupt, most of the budget is not going to the security and defense, that the government is not like fairly handling the conflict. So they went on the street, did the movement for a year, for 2 years, and then the M5 movement started in June with a religious leader called Imam Diko, who was the head of the movement with other youth. So they went on the street for several days. They were like protesting for several days until the military took the opportunity of that and did the coup d'etat, because most of the agenda was resonating with them, the fact that the government is not giving enough money to the military to fight against the terrorists. So when it happened, people think that it will be a change. Because young people were like looking for hope. Even the 2012 coup d'etat is young people who were looking for hope. That's why they went and voted for Ibeka, which was which was the former president, without any like clear political agenda for the youth. But the youth just wanted a change because they remember him in 1992 when he was talking to the students saying that if you don't study, our children will go abroad and come back and they will lead this country. So they were like, we want somebody with a voice, somebody who can bring change without understanding what can they specifically offer you as a youth. So then those youth were the reason of the coup d'etat, but unfortunately were used as well by some stakeholders in power. So when the 2002 coup d'etat happened, the military took power and have promised to organize the election in the shortest period. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. As you know, ECOWAS put the sanction on Mali. And then that also have given, again, more popularity to the military in power, because they don't understand that a country that is in conflict, how can ECOWAS put an economically sanction? Because that means that is the population that is going to suffer more than the military who did the coup d'etat. So that gives more popularity to the military in power, and I guess they have used that as well to maintain in power. And most of the speech they were using is the nationalism, the patriotism. Unfortunately, Barkhane have not communicated effectively with the local population, because most of the movement who were demanding the departure of MINUSMA, especially the big movement which was led by Ben de Cerveau, was like the message they were using is saying that Barkhane was here for over 10 years but have never solved any security issues in Mali, but have made it worse because they have been involved in like quote-unquote community-based ethnic violence. So external actors like MINUSMA and Barkhane, I think, have been victim of obviously their own mandates, because MINUSMA could not fight directly terrorism, but the local population did not understand that, and that was also used to have a movement protesting against them. And also speech were used as with Barkhane, French was behind MINUSMA's most decisions, that's like the perception of like a normal Malians who haven't really critically understand the conflict. So that's how the military movement were gaining more and more power after the departure of Barkhane. Then this same movement have asked the departure of MINUSMA. And then after that, they have also asked the end of the peace agreement, because for them there were some external actors who are behind the peace agreement, so that they can dialogue directly with the Malian people. So I think I would not go deeper. I will stop here. Maybe like with the questions, I will be able to answer more deeply.
Thank you very much, Fatima. I think even for those in the audience who do not know much about Mali, you still managed to give us a good taste of the huge spectrum of youth-led protests, anti-government protests, but also anti-peace agreement protests, anti-international intervention protests, and as drivers of change. I will now turn to you, General Mathieson. You have been in the role of an external actor from a more of a military perspective. So I guess the question of mandate, your mandate was probably not to deal with protest activists on the ground, but still I would love to hear your thoughts on how actors like the MINUSMA were deciding to engage or not to engage with those actors, and what challenges you faced.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to also be part of this panel. And also my compliments to the Berko Foundation for putting this topic on the agenda. I've not seen much of this topic being on agendas for these type of seminars, so that's very good. Let me share indeed my thoughts on the theme. And I also compliment Fatima for her few minutes that she described already a lot of the complexity in Mali, because Mali is really, really complex. And we have been facing that, me and my role as force commander, Mr. Wana as being the SRSG in the final years of the mission. Let me say up front, and I'm a security actor, I was a security actor being a military, we need inclusivity in peace processes. And peace processes and the people involved in a nation deserve inclusivity. And that is about, fair and equal representation in peace processes. And being a security actor, let me also give my view on how I see the role of a security actor, because I think it's important to mention as well. There is never a single military solution for any conflict. But often we need military as part of the solution. And that is why in Mali, for instance, there was this multi-dimensional approach. And basically most of the bigger UN missions are multi-dimensional missions. Having military, but also having police, but also people that work governance, development, humanitarian, human rights, etc., etc. And that is important, that comprehensive approach. And in that approach, I think an external actor like the UN also has a role in facilitating, encouraging, influencing that inclusivity. And let me make a sidestep. I'm currently also a member of the advisory board of the Principles for Peace Foundation. That's the foundation that developed the principles of peace and now is further spreading those and working those. And one of the principles is promoting pluralism, which is basically defining the need for participation and ensuring fair and equal participation and representation of relevant stakeholders in peace processes. And that is extremely important. Now, a protest, and we all know it, is a sign of or an action or of disapproval, of objection to something. I think it's always important to identify and understand the reasons behind a protest. It's always coming from somewhere. Because let me give you a few examples, and Fatima already referred to some of those. It was in January 22, when ECOWAS had implemented the sanctions that Fatima was referring to, that we saw protests in Bamako. But it appeared to be that basically most of those, the government was behind it to generate popular support, or at least the perception of popular support against those sanctions. So the question is whether that's a sincere or valid protest that's indeed kind of representing the population or not. Another example, and Fatima referred to that as well, the role of Imam Dicko, who was a very influential religious leader in Mali, and who was also somebody that dares to raise his voice against the government or the military junta. And if I compare the two, Imam Dicko's reasons for generating and mobilizing popular support was about more sincere reasons, you know, fighting corruption, transparency, inclusivity, and good governance. So it's important always to identify what is behind the process, because that is also needed to, as an external actor, to identify how and in what way and whether or not to engage or not. And another point I think is also, you know, what is a mass protest and who is represented in the protest? And I will give you an example of that as well. In the course of 22, and Fatima has also been referring to that as well, we first had anti-French protest, and later on it turned into anti-MINUSMA protests as well. And we had this Yerawolo movement that was organizing protests. And I remember a protest in September 22 that was announced, but it appeared that only, well, not even a few thousand people showed up. In Bamako, by the way. And Bamako is the capital of Mali, with about, correct me if I'm wrong, Fatima, about 3 million people. Well, a protest of not even a few thousand people against 3 million people in Bamako, is that a mass protest or not? But another thing is even more relevant, I would say. It was an anti-MINUSMA sentiment. But I know that population in areas in the north where we operated and in the central region, people were happy and positive about what MINUSMA did. And Bamako was in the south. That was not the operations area because it was safe there. So sometimes there's a difference in perception for reasons. So it's always important also as an external actor to look at what is behind it, and do we really understand where the protest is coming from in order to identify the right way to engage. You know, and then that brings me to the role of engaging or non-engagement of external actors. I think external actors, depending on who they are, of course, but if I refer to the UN, for instance, there is always a role in facilitating, encouraging inclusivity in processes, in peace processes, and always a role to engage, reach out and establish a dialogue. It may help that inclusivity in that process, but it definitely helps to get a better understanding about the situation. And with that, to be able in a better way to play your role as an external actor. And leadership counts, of course, because leadership sets the tone in that as well. And it's also important, I think, to early on in processes identify and realize the need for that inclusivity. And if I refer to Mali, for instance, there have been reasons early on to exclude the jihadist motivated groups from the peace process. Later on, 2019 and the years thereafter, they gained more influence and more control in central Mali, North Mali, etc., causing a significant deterioration of the security situation. But they have never been part of the peace process. So if you look at MINUSMA or to the French or even the Malian armed forces blaming not being able to fight these groups, well, also that brings me to my earlier remark, there's never a single military solution. But the other point is, and you know, I'll leave it in the middle, how that has evolved over the years. They've never been part of the peace process, but I think at a certain point in time, even those type of groups need to be included, or at least a dialogue needs to be established if possible. I'll leave it to that.
Thank you very much for talking about the challenges you face, but also already some concrete recommendations in terms of analysis, in terms of pushing for inclusion and avoiding maybe further radicalization for groups that are excluded. So maybe I'll give you a chance, Fatima, as we did before on Sudan, whether you would have a couple of concrete recommendations that you'd like to leave us with.
Thank you. I think in terms of like recommendation, I would say that for external actors involving with the protest movement, peace protest movement, is to be very strategic. When I say strategic, have like a strategic engagement so that you don't want to be seen by one party that you are taking a side in the protest or in the conflict. So it's very important that you engage with movements that are inclusive, so that, as you mentioned, that's like takes the need of like all the different parties in the movement. And I think it's very important to also communicate effectively with local people, with the civil society, so that they really understand your agenda, why you are here, and your mandate. I wouldn't say that MINISMA didn't do that, because I have been taking part of a lot of meetings where they were really talking to like head of like civil society organization, where they will really constantly share with them what they do and what they are doing under the ground. But I think it's important to do that more often, so that people understand that, because most people are saying that, for instance, with the MINISMA, there is no peace to keep. So what is the point of having MINISMA? But what they don't understand is like, MINISMA is not doing, yes, the military intervention, but they're helping a lot in terms of humanitarian and development. Today we have over thousands of youth who are out of jobs, who are now vulnerable to be recruited by the armed groups in the region because they don't have job, and unfortunately the government is not in the capacity to help these youth, to give them the job. So now they become like the new ones who are going to be taking arms. So it's very important to really communicate, so that some people don't use that against them. So for me, make your agenda as clear as possible, communicate effectively, and engage with movements that are very inclusive.
Excellent. Any final recommendations from you?
Yeah, it's a simple answer, and I've said it. Reach out, engage, and establish a dialogue. Also with the ones that have a completely different opinion. And be in a listening mode. Don't make the mistake if you reach out to the ones who have a completely different opinion to try to change their opinion. No. That would be a mistake. Reach out and be in a listening mode and establish the relationship, because once you have a relationship and you look each other in the eyes every now and then, you get a different relationship. And it might be that you can initiate thoughts that might lead to a change of opinion, but don't deliberately try to change opinions. Establish the relationship and listen. It gives you also yourself a better understanding, and it will benefit the work.
Thank you so much. So I've heard from all five of you about the importance of youth, the energy that youth represent. So youth are part of the solution. They are guardians of the revolution. And therefore, they have to be involved as well in the design of solutions. But now there's a lot of challenges into how to do that effectively, whether they should become political leaders or not, whether that's even what they are about, maybe not. How can we help them to claim the space as they should, or rethink maybe what decision-making spaces should look like? And a lot of interesting and concrete recommendations that start with listening, understanding, establishing relationship, proper communication, the need for engaging with those movements that are seen as most inclusive, and then external actors getting their acts together, coordinating between them, and adopting a comprehensive approach. So a lot of really good learnings for all of us. We are now coming to the end of the panel part of this discussion. And so I invite the on-site audience to stay with us for a round of Q&A. But we will end the live streaming, so we will say goodbye to our listeners who are online. And thank you for your participation.